In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Ishwar Puri. Dr. Ishwar Puri is the Dean of Engineering at McMaster University in Hamilton, in Canada. And at McMaster, he leads the Pivot, a project that's transforming engineering education by emphasizing the power of rich experiential learning opportunities for students. In addition, he has his research interests in the area of heat transfer, energy storage, fluid mechanics, and nanostructures. And his current interests include the 3D printing of cells and tissues with biological inks and the development of nanoparticle colloids for biosensing, chemical sensing, and supercapacitor applications. He's a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Engineering and an appointed member of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. He's also become a very good friend of mine. We've known each other for a number of years, and he invited me kindly to join his Dean's Advisory Board at McMaster University, which is a very eye-opening experience. And I have the pleasure of meeting him at many conferences around the world and have done for a number of years. So welcome, Ishwar. So thankful you could join us.
Thank you, Paul. I'm very glad to be here, particularly in your company.
Well, thanks very much. We won't get into the normal dialogue that we have over a glass of wine, but I do want to start by asking you, Ishwar. You know, I always find that a lot of people don't fully understand or fully appreciate what engineering is all about. And I was wondering, what were you thinking as a young man before you came into engineering? And what did you expect from the engineering program when you got there?
I didn't want to be an engineer. I wanted to write poetry. In fact, when I was an undergraduate, I had a book of poems in English that was published. I wanted to study philosophy. I'd read on Kant and Hegel and a number of other scholars. But I grew up in the third world. I grew up in post-colonial India where there wasn't a safety net. And my mother thought that being a poet and a philosopher was a surefire way to ensure starvation for the rest of my life. So she obviously hadn't done a mass balance because, you know, if you starve, you die. But so she said, you're going to starve for the rest of your life. And my parents put a lot of pressure on me, and they wanted me to get a professional degree. And through a series of events, I wound up in an engineering program. And I wasn't particularly interested in engineering, but I did reasonably well. And when I did reasonably well, I became competitive because I wanted to compete against myself and make sure that I kept getting the grades that I did. And through the engineering program in mechanical engineering, I had the highest grades when I graduated. But I can't say that I really enjoyed it or learned or appreciated engineering.
Did you understand what engineering meant at the time, do you think?
Not really. I think that I was very interested in solving puzzles. I always have been, you know, a crossword puzzle. Right now, I'm learning French using Duolingo. But for me, learning another language is like solving a puzzle, you know, because of the architecture of the language, the grammatical context, and so on. And so the underlying basis of engineering, and it was very theoretical when it was taught to me, was essentially physics and chemistry and math. And so it was just solving these puzzles and bringing them together, which is why I think that I excelled at the assessments. But to tell you the truth, I had no knowledge of applications because at that time, when I was being educated, experiential learning, problem-based learning, project-based learning, challenge-based learning, I mean, these were not widespread pedagogies, and certainly not in the India that I grew up in the 1970s and the 1980s. I mean, the world has come a long way since then, as so has India.
No, I was going to say we have a similarity. My father was born and raised in India. I was born in England. He left the country. And when I said to him that I was going to do engineering, he lost his mind. He wanted me to be an accountant, a lawyer, anything but an engineer. I think his impression was that I'd spend the rest of my life under the hood of a car and I'd be fixing cars or fixing refrigerators. So I mean that's one of the things I think that we need to change it in the world of promoting the need for engineering around the world.
Oh, absolutely. And so after I finished engineering, I did a stint at business school. I went to one of the most prestigious business schools in India, but I couldn't stand it. I dropped out after 3 months and instead got on a plane and went to the United States, where I got a master's and PhD at the University of California at San Diego. And it was only at UC San Diego when I started doing research. Solving puzzles meant coming up with solutions to either design an experiment, interpret an experiment, develop some kind of an application that would make your experiment better. And that's when I started enjoying engineering. And I would say that, I had a successful PhD stint and a postdoctoral stint and with the usual metrics. But it wasn't until I became a faculty member when I started doing research and teaching using experiential learning methods that I really, really understood the power and the strength of engineering, which is that you have the ability to take a very large problem, break it up into little bits, solve those little bits, and then integrate those little bits together. And sometimes they don't fit, and then you have to work your way towards a comprehensive solution.
So it's,
So,
yeah,
so engineering to me means essentially, looking at small problems, coming up with solutions, and coming up with a grand solution to a grand challenge or a grand problem.
what I find interesting is the your notion of turning everything into little puzzles. It explains every time that we talk to each other, you answer a question with a question, always challenging me to come up with a solution to my own question, which I think is quite funny. But I think it's quite a nice lead in to what you're doing now at McMaster. And for the reference for everybody listening to this, when Quanser started introducing um, our virtual labs during the pandemic last year, the very first person that jumped onto the idea was Dr. Puri, sorry, Ishwar, and we spent probably the last 9 months working very closely together to help you turn what was a very ambitious project in the first place, your pivot project, which is a monumental change to the first year experience for new engineering students, which had been in the works for a number of years, and then the pandemic hit. So maybe you could touch base on some of those issues that you faced back in March or April of last year, and the importance of the pivot program for engineers, and how you can reconcile that over the course of the summer and the fall.
So, Paul, with your permission, I'd like to go actually 2 years prior to March when the
Please.
pandemic hit, because this is a remarkable story about human-centered design thinking. The story starts, I would say, in 2018, when we had discussions, and I brought a bus full of McMaster professors to Quanser in Markham. And you did a show and tell, and we had a very interesting discussion, which involved, I'd say, about 30 odd people, maybe more, about how we could bring engineering to students in a hands-on, minds-on manner. And at that point, your colleagues and you went back and did some brainstorming, and based on your current projects or your current products at that time, proposed some solutions to us. And we went back to the users, which were our faculty members, who went back to our students, who are really the users of the learning. And they felt that some of those solutions were appropriate and others were not. And so there was a 2 year back and forth, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And 2 year back and forth tells us and it informs us how to do things right. So you take the user, you design something, which your folks did, but it's an iterative process. You go back to the user. And before March, we had, somewhere in 2019, we had already designed some solutions. And by solutions, I mean project-based learning modules for students. So our aspiration was that when first-year students came to McMaster to study engineering, they would typically take 4 courses that were in 4 different subjects. But there was a very influential paper about the spiral curriculum in 1960 by Bruner, who said that rather than breaking up subject matter, you bring different subject matter throughout the curriculum and you spiral it through the curriculum where students revisit it. And each time they revisit it, they tackle a problem of greater complexity. And
Mm-hmm.
so this encourages what is called sticky learning. The learning that I had in the 1970s and early 80s when I was an undergraduate was not sticky learning, it was perishable learning. You don't use it, you lose it. But now, when you use those concepts, you use them. And as you know, we took those 4 courses and integrated them into one huge 13-unit course that spans 2 terms. And students learn through 5 projects, and Quanser has contributed to almost all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And while working on those projects in teams, they not only develop technical competencies, but they develop 21st century competencies of creativity, design thinking, integrating multiple disciplines, solving problems. They work in multicultural design, and diverse teams. They understand that they have to prepare solutions. The solutions are innovations, but those innovations have to have a business basis. And they also understand that they have to take a large context. They have to be global citizens. One of the projects that they work on amongst the 5 is building a recycling plant because of the emphasis on sustainability, but they build it for local issues where you would have the recycling stream that we would find, in our neighborhoods in Canada or in America. So if you think about the Quanser solutions, they're not just solutions that augment sticky learning, that encourage hands-on, minds-on learning. But because they are projects, they also build these 21st century competencies that humans need because, technical work could be increasingly automated. But how we work with human beings cannot be automated. So I think, Paul, without being verbose or grandiose about this, what we've done together is secured the futures of these McMaster students. We've secured their employability, we've secured their outcomes, because not only are we giving them technical competencies, but we are giving them a platform. What we've built is a platform through which they learn how to interact with humans, solve human problems through design thinking. So Quanser and McMaster Engineering pivoted through our relationship over 2 years. And what we are teaching students now is how they can themselves pivot, right? But
But
before they could pivot, we had to pivot ourselves.
what I find really fascinating about this approach that you've taken, and I've witnessed in the dean's advisory boards, presentations from your 3rd and 4th year students doing capstone projects and your outreach programs where you've done amazing things with the local community. And these are students who haven't gone through the pivot program, and I look at them and frankly speaking, compared to what I was like when I graduated, and I was in the mid 80s. I could not have presented to a bunch of senior, people anywhere near as eloquently as they do. But I see, their diversity in the teams, their communication skills, their ability to kind of look at problems, try and assess it, and pivot and change. And when I'm interviewing people for working at Quanser in the engineering department specifically, it's very rare to see those. There is only a few places that we can draw upon where the students have that capability. But you've done this in their very first year. This is I think the number is 11 or 1,200 students are being put through this program in the first year. So that was a big change. How did you convince the faculty to go down this path?
It wasn't easy because when I first proposed integrated learning and project-based learning, there was a lot of skepticism from faculty and also from students, because current students felt that future students would not be prepared in high school But the reality is that project-based learning, everyone is prepared for that. I mean, if you give an erector set to a kid, or if you give a child a bicycle, they're going to learn how to ride it, right? I mean, that's hands-on, minds-on learning. And so what we did was that we started a pilot program. There's a brand new program coming out at that time in collaboration with our uh, Dean of Health Sciences on biomedical engineering. And the biomedical engineering program, or iBiomed as we call it, um, we decided to have integrated learning and project-based learning in that. And what we found was that the outcomes were spectacular. Those students performed as well, if not better, and typically better than the students who were going through the regular engineering program. And not only that, based on their first year projects, which should be a shot in the arm for Quanser as well. Based on their first year projects, there were many startups that came out. And I think, Paul, you met some of the individuals who presented.
I have, yeah. And I remember vividly being sitting around the table, and the advisory board consists of primarily alumni from McMaster who've done well in business, and you've got a wide range of people around the table. And you presented that, and I think it was John Preston, your associate dean for research. He presented the results from this experiment, or this pilot, and demonstrated that the students were not only learning the technical content, but they were building their capacity for teamwork and other professional skills which come out of that. And I think you asked the question with a little wry smile on your face to everyone around the rooms, and saying, do you think we should proceed with something like this? What can I have a vote maybe? And the whole room just erupted in laughter, and everyone put their hands up and said, go ahead, Ishwar, you got our vote, right? And now you're doing it. How's it going? Because this is your first full implementation for the first year students. You're into your second semester now. You've done it virtually. How's it being received by the students?
So, very interesting story. So now we come to March of last year, and we've all gone virtual. It looks like we'll be virtual for a while. So in March, we think we'll come back. The pandemic will die down, and by May, it's apparent it's not going to die down, and we might be going for a while. And that's where we really started to work with Quanser, and the whole thought of digital twins went into overdrive.
Right.
So part of it was prescient, because the teams that were considering the Quanser projects had already, on both sides, already determined about a year before March, that we would virtualize these projects. And the reason was that now you have this massive course. If a student falls ill or they have a life event, do they really have to come back and repeat the entire course? Can't we have a module that they could do virtually, or they could come back and do virtually? And so that was very prescient. But the whole point now was that rather than thinking about it in a leisurely manner and saying, hey, let's virtualize, although we had conceptualized virtualization, we had to go into overdrive. And you folks delivered. So we developed digital twins of all of the projects, and students are now working on those digital twins. So last, you asked how it's going. I'll
That's
give you
great.
an
Yeah,
answer.
the feedback. I'm interested in the student feedback, and also the faculty, because I think they've had to implement something quite unique.
So this is the high point, right? From the student perspective, I'll give you an anecdote. So in December, I did a round the world tour. But of course, the round the world tour nowadays is on a platform such as this.
Right.
And it was amazing how I could go through multiple time zones in one day, something that would have taken me about a week to do, to
Right.
hop from place to place. Because we had not only domestic students, but we had international students all over the world, and it was a check-in with them. And along the way, I met this student, Kwai, from Kenya. And Kwai told me that he was very disappointed that he couldn't come to McMaster, because he was really, he really wanted to come to McMaster. He was very disappointed he couldn't come to campus. He couldn't get that experience. And he said that he struggled actually with some of his courses. which were the lecture type courses. The one in first year, students do a lot of courses from outside of engineering, math, physics, and so on and so forth. And we're trying to do the best we can with them. But he said that the light in his day was really 1P13, this massive engineering course where we virtualized several projects. And he said he really enjoyed meeting his teammates because we cycle the students through different teams. And he said he really looked forward to it every day. He looked forward to working with them. He looked forward to the class. And there's been an overwhelming response that students are very happy with 1P13, the course with the digital twins, in relation to the traditional learning that they're getting in other courses, other non-engineering courses. The faculty members are very pleased with that because obviously when you put in effort and you get good outcomes, people are very happy. So for the first time, I think we're in the middle of a pandemic and we did a student satisfaction survey with their learning and the results are off the charts.
I love your vision of what's possible for the future. Maybe you'd like to share with everybody what your vision of a portable
So
credentials would look like.
I think that with the digital solutions that we're talking about, we've developed them in such a way that we've integrated the curriculum. The next step, I think, would be to deconstruct them and to develop them into separate modules, where the modules could be plug and play. So today, when students learn subjects, so for instance, in a term, they learn 5 subjects, but they learn those subjects in silos. They'll go to one class, independent of the other. They'll go to the second class, the third class. The instructors don't really talk. They're learning independently. But with digital solutions, what we can do is we can interweave the subjects, because after all, when students taking 5 subjects, subject matter A has relevance to what is being taught in subject matter C. And so with project-based learning and some of these modules we're developing, we can integrate the curriculum not only horizontally, but also vertically through the years, where you can get a little peep of what might be an application in year 4 when you're in year 3, and so on. Now, once you have modules, you can now start to restructure your learning entirely. There are students who are degree-seeking students, but there are also learners who may want to learn just, one facet or another facet of a subject. And so once you have these modules, you can develop these modules into what are called micro-credentials. And interrelated modules can stack up, which means that when learners are assessed on their learning, they get a micro-credential which you can stack up, micro-credential 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and with 5 or 6 or 7 or 10, however many, depending upon the size of your modules, you could then give learners a certificate. And that certificate tells an employer that they have a technical competency in something, but they also have skills like teamwork, leadership, communication, and at what level. And so you could develop a scale. So I would say that we not only want to produce employable graduates, but we also want to have impact. To have impact, we need to have programs that are innovative, which means that we also have to, and this may seem self-serving, but it's not, also maintain the employability of our own employees so that they are relevant and they don't lose their jobs. So you've got to have a model that brings in revenue, that allows you to innovate, but also sustain the jobs of the employees that you have. But that model, of course, is predicated on providing the best outcomes for students. So it is altruism, it is doing good by the world, but we also have to make sure that the model is sustainable, that you don't go with a tin cup or a handout to someone like a government or something. When you're in charge of your own destiny and you have revenue from these different sources, whether it's micro-credentials, pre-engineering programs, degree-producing programs, you can do whatever you want.
So do you see that the changes that are happening right now around the world are going to have a profound impact on the education community?
Absolutely. Every single institution in the world, regardless of whether they had substantial means or limited means, has made the pivot to virtual teaching and learning.
Hmm.
So that's not going to go away. I mean, we've been talking about virtual teaching and learning ever since MOOCs and even before that.
Right.
And before that, it used to happen with when I was an assistant professor, I used to tape lectures on these VHS cassettes, which used to go out to learners, right? And they would be off-campus programs where they would borrow the tape and they'd plug it in and then they'd learn something. So virtual learning has been happening for a long time. There were correspondence courses which people did by mail, right? So what we've done is we've virtualized learning in a technological sense, and that technology is not going away. Now, the value of a degree depends on how the employer values it. So if an employer values a degree, that degree is relevant, whether it's accredited or it's not accredited. And so think about it. There's an opportunity for-profit organizations. All my life, I've worked in a not-for-profit because, I believe that education is a public good. But imagine if for-profit organizations started to use some of these virtual tools for teaching and learning. They weren't accredited. The quality control wasn't there, or the quality control only went to the market, and it was not as a result of experts. Uh, there's a big scope for them to come in, particularly with micro credentials. I mean, this is how disruptive innovation takes place, right? If you look at Clayton Christensen's work,
Right.
the Toyota Corolla comes in, it's a low-end car, and then suddenly people buy it. Toyota makes it better and better. Out comes the Camry, and bingo, now you have the Lexus. And so now Toyota is the car in demand, and you disrupt the other, fat and happy automakers, right?
Well,
So
the most disruptive technology we've seen in our lifetime has been the iPhone or
that's
something
right.
similar, right? I mean, it's taken away multiple devices which are now packaged in one piece that no one can live without. So, and I see that happening in so many areas in the future.
And that might happen in education now that we virtualize, that virtual education has been accepted. There are barriers to this. One of the barriers is that the student experience is lost. And so what bricks and mortars universities have to do is double down on the student experience,
Right.
understand what it means. And the second is that bricks and mortar universities, what my responsibility is to double down on the human. We make sure that our students interact with other humans and they understand that the best design, the best solution is a human-centered design solution. And I think that's one of the lessons of the pandemic. If we don't want to get disrupted, I mean, I think if we sit back and we are fat and happy and we are skeptical about, well, we haven't been disrupted before, I think we've got another thing coming after the pandemic.
Well, Ishwar, it's always the case. I mean, we could spend another 2 hours sitting here and for everyone listening here, I probably still owe Ishwar at least a dozen beers for the number of times that either you bought me one or you've done me a favor. But honestly, Ishwar, thank you so much for spending the time. I know it's you're a very busy man, and I've seen the impact that you've had on McMaster University firsthand, and the impact you've had with us, because not only did you listen to the vision, see you acted immediately, and now we are involved in a number of programs, probably 13 or 14 courses within McMaster. So thanks for taking the time to be with me.
My pleasure, Paul, and no need to thank me. I'm a big fan. You folks are doing great work. Thank you for
Thank,
having me.
thank you very much indeed. We'll see you soon.
Way to go, laddies.
Bye now.